Hi, Mike Trout here, and I want to do a talk about Foundups and why it's important to me and why it should be important to you. I started Foundups in 2010, and really by accident. I was asking myself the question after doing startups for close to 10 years: is the startup broken? Now, the reason why I asked that question was I was having a heck of a time. And I was thinking to myself, if someone with a master's degree who's had a successful startup, who basically has good ideas, but simply cannot implement these ideas, is the failing because of that individual, or is the failing part of the system? And if it is systemic, or is it endemic? Which means, basically, is the startup fundamentally flawed to make most startups fail, or is it systemically flawed, meaning the system's broken and you need to fix it somehow? And in discovering and exploring this question, what I came to realization is, number one, there is a significant problem with the startup because most startups fail. Now, so well, that's part of being capitalism. Well, does that make it right? If I have a business idea and I'm most likely going to fail at that idea, why should I even try that idea? Well, you may say, well, if everyone succeeded in their idea, then what would there be? I mean, there wouldn't be any system. Well, why could you not have a system where people would succeed more? And what is it about the idea that makes success and failure? And what I came to understand was basically ideas that were successful were those that ultimately showed a significant return to investors who put the money in there, and ultimately they can mitigate against risk by supporting these ideas. And if ultimately the return wasn't significant, then they wouldn't support it. And here's the crux of the problem. Most significant problems, let's say even recently, like solar, was not a viable business 10 years ago. Why? Because the cost of making panels and so on and so on and so on was so prohibitive. Well, had we made it possible 10 years ago, we would have less reliance on fossil fuels, and our planet potentially could be in a better position. Or let's take the electric car. The electric car, was the first car ever created in America, was the electric car. Not the combustion, but the electric car. The Model T Ford, if I remember correctly, was an electric car. Not only that, in 1990 there's a resurgence, and there's a great documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car, that you should watch. The bottom line is our economic system empowers something called supply and demand, and ultimately whenever there is a shortage, then the value of that thing goes up significantly in price, and it behooves those investors or whatever to keep that sort of imbalance in place. And you could go on to extrapolate from that to realize that basically every crisis on our planet, barring pandemics and natural disasters, which you really have very little control over. For example, like the Ebola plague is really a pandemic. The Fukushima earthquake is a natural disaster. Ultimately, every crisis, from the depletion of our fisheries to our climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it, to the pollution of our rivers, the pollution of our air, things called dimming, the melting of our ice caps, the rising of sea levels, all these massive, massive challenges that we are now undertaking and facing can be linked directly and indirectly to our, we could call it, one world experimental model, our business model, or which we can simply call our startup business model. And this startup business model, and the reason why I use the word startup is the startup is the engine that basically fuels this entire experiment. And it is this thing, this startup, that ultimately is responsible for every crisis facing our planet. So you have to come to that realization, and you have to think about it and meditate it for a while. And if you come to the conclusion, Michael Trout, you are right, then the only course of action that we can do as a society is to change that model. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, communism. Let me explain what communism is. Communism, I'm not talking about communism. Communism is basically governmental control over systems. The bailout, which we did in America, the land of capitalism, was a very communistic thing to do. It's a very socialist thing to do. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is transforming what you could call closed capitalism, or what we call capitalism, into something called open capitalism. Or you could actually use another term instead of open capitalism, use a term what I coined social capitalism. Social capitalism is this. It's just like social media. Social. It is putting the corporation and the driving forces of the corporation in the hands of the people. Social, society. Social capitalism is not socialism. Socialism is a state-imposed direction of the markets and things. Social capitalism is simply turning away from the fuel and allowing the many to participate in the process, using things like crowdfunding and setting up the corporation in such a way that it removes the few as those that have the power. Where corporations in the future, so something called Ethereum, will become autonomous, self-driven. And ultimately in the future, code will drive these entities. And it will be individuals who help these projects launch will become the owners of these. Think of it as like the co-op. But a new kind of co-op, a global co-op. A cooperative for helping to save our planet by empowering the people to do it. And removing the need for corporations, or I call access to private funding sources, right? Because right now, in order to launch a business, in order to do something, you have to have access to closed financial networks. They're closed. Whether you're getting money from a bank, whether you're getting money from an investor, these networks are closed. And ultimately, we need to open up this network. And how do we open up this network? Well, very simply. Imagine that future corporations were mandated in their articles of incorporation to reinvest 80 to 90% of the net profits back into launching more such ideas. Right? Imagine if that these ideas would be collectively owned by those who help launch them, and that these ideas ultimately level up into entities that then repeat the cycle, repeat the cycle, repeat the cycle. All of a sudden you don't have situations where, like Microsoft, we only give to Portland, Oregon. You know, you wonder why, for example, why Portland is this huge, amazing place to live. Well, you got billion-dollar companies that have transformed it and have invested in that change. And sure, people have helped in that change, but ultimately it's these corporations that have decided to put the money into these social solutions that have made it possible. Because really, ultimately, money is the driving force of change right now in the current model. So, with that said, and you've come to the realization that yes, our global economy experiment, which is powered by the startup, which powers everything. I mean, if you think of political contributions, if you think of, you know, everything that we have going on in society, the growth, the idea that, you know, we have to have exponential growth to be successful as a community. Well, that's ludicrous. Exponential growth is not possible on a finite resource planet. You can't make up shit. And if that's the case, then a model based on exponential growth is inherently flawed. And you can break apart the startup, and there's something called compounded annual growth rate, which is exponential growth, said in a kind of fancy business way. And if you talk to any VC or anyone who gives money, they really don't care what the widget is. They look at the financials, they look at the track record, and if it meets a certain criteria of growth and everything else, then they invest in it. They don't give a crap what it is. They don't give a crap. Well, I can credit that. They're starting to give a crap what it is, and they're starting to give a crap what it is, but on how it's going to impact things. But ultimately, what really talks is the bottom line. So, the question that I want to leave you with is, number one, is our global system, is our business system broken? And if so, how would you fix it? Now, I've spent 5 years on this question. I know how I'd fix it, and it's called Foundups. And there are many parts to Foundups. There's a decentralized management system, which is based on holacracy. There is a corporation model, which is even, you know, which is my creation, but you can say it's like a B Corp plus. It's called the open corporation. And these corporations are mandated to reinvest net profits and capital gains. So if you participate, you're saying that if I have capital gains, I'm going to use these things to launch more solutions. You see, unless we can have a model that basically will put solutions in the driving seat, and regardless if the solution is profitable or not, it doesn't matter. All that matters is we're implementing a solution, because most solutions we have to implement, guess what, are not going to be profitable. And non-profits funding these non-profitable things simply won't work. And we can't have a gatekeeper-driven solution that requires individuals constantly asking for money. We have to empower individuals to give the money on a scale that collectively provides the funding needed to tackle these solutions. And Foundups does all that. My name is Mike Trout. To learn more, visit Foundups.com.